and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP, Urbana, 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Yep, it is. Views expressed are those of the speakers, yes they are, and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, Urbana Socialist Forum, or, as we like to say on the TV version, UPTV. So whose views are these? Well, that is a very good question. These views are our own, and by our, in this instance, I mean myself and my charming guest, who will hopefully introduce herself now and answer a question that I've been wondering about for a while.
Oh, hi, I'm Valeria Loo-Kung. I'm a first-year student at the University of Illinois. I am studying urban planning and sociology. I'm originally from... I was born in Lima, Peru. I currently live in Bethesda, Maryland, which is right outside of D.C., and I'm very, very excited to be on the show and have a great conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you're here. The question that I was referring to is that I have friends from other Asian countries, and generally speaking, it is accustomed to give your last, what we in the West call your last name first, followed by your first name. So I would, if I did that, I would be Garza Thomas. And so seeing your name with Asian names in general, Westerners like myself, who know this, are like, okay, is this the right way? Am I saying this right? Is this a first name and last name? How does this work? So you answered my question. So
so my full name is Valeria Loo-Kung. I've heard stories, a lot of my family members immigrated from China to Lima, Peru during the war with Japan. And so actually I've heard a lot of stories that my last name, Loo-Kung, is only supposed to be Lu. And that Kung is like the first name, but they, messed up the immigration paper, something like that, because my great-grandfather, or my great-great-grandfather, something like that, couple generations back, that was his full name, and they mistook it as just the last name because he also gave, a Western name, Roberto, or Robert in English. But, so now I have a compound last name, but that's from my dad's side. I think my dad's side is more kind of removed from the, the Chinese culture aspect. They're, culturally very, very Peruvian.
Oh, okay.
But my mom, who's also, she is Cindy Yi Wong, so she is also, descendant of Chinese immigrants in Lima. And her side of the family is actually very, very in touch with, their Chinese culture. My great-grandmother immigrated, who is still alive. She immigrated,
wow, really?
She immigrated to Lima very, very young. Her story is actually really, really fascinating. I know this, I spent, my grandparents were visiting us, and, just spending time with them as exploring more of my identity and kind of being more conscious about the fact that it is not very normal to have a very Asian family in Latin America. I think that I had just recently come to terms with that because it's just like something that I've grown up with and I haven't really registered. So in the past couple of years, my grandparents were staying at my house a lot, and my grandfather is one of 6 children. So they would all come in and they would tell us tell me and my brother a little bit of the story of how my great-grandmother immigrated from China. And at 16, she was one of 3 wives, actually. And she was 16, she was married, she already had a child, and I'm 18, and that idea is completely foreign to me.
Wow.
But it's honestly really interesting that it was during the Japanese-Chinese War, and her husband had to flee the country. And so if you go from the Canton province of China and you go across the Pacific on boat and you kind of go diagonally down, you end up in Lima, Peru. And that's kind of the story of how that happened.
They weren't intended? It was just...
It
kind of started going.
It was kind of intentional. I think at first maybe it wasn't, because a lot of people just want to get out of the country, and that just seemed like, it's a coastal city, it's a place of refuge. And then after a while, a lot more Chinese immigrants, went to Lima.
Is there a big Chinese population
there? There is, yeah. It actually has the largest Chinese community in South America.
Oh, that's interesting. because I do another show on Fridays, which is a Japanese language radio show, and a lot of people from Brazil listen. There's a lot of Japanese in Brazil,
Yeah.
which is interesting. I don't know how,
don't
there
know
are
that.
these enclaves all around the world that
Yeah.
unless this is a stupid thing to say, unless you know, you don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not famous. They're just, if you know about it, it's like, oh yeah, there's lots of Chinese
Yeah.
in Lima, Peru. But if I never knew that, that's completely
Yeah.
news to me.
Yeah, so it's so I was born in Lima, and so I had to it was just like innate to straddle like being Peruvian but also like being Chinese. I think I compare it a lot to like the people that are kind of like confused by it. I kind of make the comparison of like being Asian American here in America, that you're like culturally very integrated into American society, but also your parents have like these Chinese dishes and aspects of the Chinese culture, a lot of filial piety, things like that. And so and it was something that I think that very recently I fully processed, because like I said, it was something that it was just something that was a part of my life, and I didn't notice how much of kind of a rarity it was outside of Lima. Because the Chinese community is so settled there. Coming to the U.S., it's just kind of like, oh, like I always get the question first. It's like, where are you from, like originally? And it's like, oh God, that question is so problematic.
Too complicated.
Yeah.
I think. And why would you ask?
Yeah.
Why does it matter?
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to explain, because obviously, there's nothing. I don't know. I feel like I've always been very, proud of my heritage, but also I think I come from a point of privilege that my parents, could come to the U.S. by choice, just, strictly for like a job offer. It wasn't a thing of necessity, and I can still go back to Lima whenever I want. So I think that is something that has definitely influenced the way that I speak about my heritage. Like my great-grandmother, I was telling you, like, they were, refugees like from this war, but they built themselves up from nothing, and now, they live very comfortable lives in Lima.
Yeah.
And so I feel like the way that I talk about my identity, very freely, I'm very open to talk about it. I think it definitely reflects, my privilege in a way, because there are other people that I know that maybe that's a more sensitive topic because their family's history of, immigrating to different places is such a point of, I don't know, I'd say that it's, the way that I think about it is maybe that it wasn't such an easy trip, and or the outcomes haven't been there yet. And that's why I think about it a lot, especially because I get that question so much, that it's like, where are you from? Like, because my full name is Valeria Alejandra Loo-Kung, so it's like the most like Hispanic first and middle name, and then the most Chinese last names. And of course, like in South America, you use your mom and your dad's name.
Oh yeah.
And since they're both Chinese immigrants, it's like, it's a long one. Yeah.
Yeah. So how is the Chinese community in Peru? Is it like it is here, where it's sort of an ethnic enclave, like Chinatown in San Francisco? Is there a Chinatown in Lima, or is is it more like just part of the community and there's not really that much difference?
No, there definitely is. There definitely is a physical Chinatown where you can find all your original Chinese restaurants and stuff like that. But also, I think, since Lima as a city has grown so much, and a lot of Chinese immigrants have actually, they're in the same businesses. They've grown out of that initial neighborhood. That, physically, spatially, they're like, spread out all across the city, but the community sense of it is still very much there. I think as late as like my parents' generation, they still had a school. It's since most of the schools there are private, it's a school that is teaches a lot about Chinese culture, and obviously it was a space made for Chinese immigrants to like send their children to go to school to like you receive like a Peruvian but with Chinese like education in it. So the community aspect is still very there. I think that it's definitely one of those things in Lima that if you're Chinese, my grandmother probably knows you, like, or of your family.
Right.
So.
Well, I ask partly because one big topic about, if you work on immigration for any length of time, you will hear a number of very negative things that the people out there say about immigrants, because they don't know, or they just have this, feeling. And one of them is the reluctance that immigrants have to assimilate into our culture. They don't speak English. They don't, take our values and all blah blah blah. And I think they say this without ever stopping to think that part of the reason that happens, part of the reason is obviously pride in your heritage. It's like, well, this is who I am. This is where I am from, and I want to bring these things with me, and I don't want to let these things go just because I'm in a new place. Yeah. Just because I live here doesn't mean I'm rejecting everything about my past. It means that I have decided that here is where I want to be for whatever reason. So that's part of it, obviously. But also another part is the way a lot of communities don't welcome you. They're just like, oh, you're not one of us. You can't, go to our schools. You can't work at my place. So you're like, okay, I can't do anything. I'm not allowed in the social scene, so I'll invent my own. And it will naturally be based on my culture that I brought with me, because yours is, turning me away. It's turning a cold shoulder to me. So I just think there's both things going on, and that a lot of people don't see that. They just think you're supposed to aspire to be like them, whether they welcome you or accept you as one of them or not, and it doesn't work. So I guess I was wondering about what it's like. Do Peruvians look at you and go, yeah, you're a Peruvian, or do they go, oh, you're Chinese? And
I think that, since it's such a large community, I think that both are recognized. I think, and again, it has to go with privilege, that a lot of the Chinese families have, been able to build themselves up out of nothing. Mm-hmm. So they're, it's like, we accept you because, you're on our level of, social status now.
Okay.
And so, obviously there's like cultural differences, but the thing is that classism is so deeply embedded in Peruvian society, and especially in Lima, that some, I think that overshadows kind of the cultural aspect. I think that with my generation more, there's been, more intermixing of, since by my generation, Chinese Peruvians are very, have gotten to this status where they can send their children to like the best schools and all that, and their families are culturally Peruvian, with Chinese. I used to say that I'm half Peruvian, half Chinese, but I am Peruvian of Chinese descent.
Right.
So, and it's gotten to that point in society where it's like, okay, that's where we're at right now. And I think maybe some of it has to do with the precedent, because my grandmother's generation, since she went to a Chinese school, that is a lot of her circle, her immediate circle, and then friends outside of that is that she's made in adulthood. And so I think it's just like the kind of, I don't know, the generational journey of like how this community, they're all following kind of similar paths, from like being, immigrants to being integrated in society, but their own specific enclave. I think, I was thinking about what you said about how sometimes, people that, live in a certain country and they see immigrants as, why aren't they aspiring to be like us? I see that a lot in American culture. Like, I think it's very Western to think that, that people, that we're so desirable, that it's like people are like, fighting to come here because America's the best or whatever. And I think that's a very, very Western mindset, to think that everyone, like, this is like top-notch culture, I think that automatically you kind of become integrated in the space that you are living, and, that's not a product of, you just wanting to assimilate to this culture. I think it just happens,
Well, Western culture is largely founded on a sense of destiny and greatness, and we are the pinnacle the evolution of mankind, culturally, all these different kinds of things. It's a very sort of brash. Well, I could say a lot of other things about it. I won't.
Right.
I won't get into an angry rant, but I mean, it's sort of ignorantly arrogant, I think. The assumption that strength equals greatness, and wealth equals greatness, and all these things. It's like, because what Western culture primarily has is power. U.S. has got the biggest army anywhere, pretty much. Maybe not the greatest number, but the most expensive one anyway.
Right.
And, it's such a wealthy nation overall that there's this sense that, well, that means we're at the top of the heap. It's automatically, it's sort of capitalism and self-righteousness and racism and all sorts of things rolled into one that creates this sense that somehow Western is the pinnacle, of everything.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's strange. It's hard to talk about because I grew up in that. I was telling you earlier, I'm a second generation immigrant. So in a sense, like, my parents were what anti-immigrant people think of as the ideal immigrants. They wanted to jump from here to being white, middle class, whatever. And so they did their best to raise a family in a belief that we're as good as everybody else, we're the same as everybody else, we're white. I mean, basically. I mean, as recently as the last census, my father called me up and told me that, you can write down white. You can say that you're white on here. I'm like, why, I just, excuse me, I'm sick and I'm choking myself up here. It was like such a bewildering thing. Like, why would you call me up to tell me that? Why are you so concerned? It's almost like he was concerned that I might put something else down, which, if anybody who knows anything about the census realizes, they don't give you that option. You can say you're Hispanic, but then they're asking if you're white, and they don't give you another option. Are you black, Asian, Native American, or white, or something like that? It's like there isn't. They maneuver you so that even if you're hardcore, Latino, Hispanic, however you want to put it, you still end up having to put white unless you just opt for other, or some kind of strange thing that doesn't work. So, but for some reason that was like really important to him all these years later, to still try to push this, no, you're white, you have, your roots are in Spain, you're European, you're not, the just denial of the whole indigenous aspect of what makes up Mexico. I mean, Mexican culture is indigenous with a little bit of Spanish mixed in, a lot of indigenous, little bit of Spanish. So the chances of me being like pure Spanish with touch of indigenous are very slim. Excuse me.
Oh.
Sorry, I'm just.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's just a long way around saying that is an example of what I think people want immigrants to do, is to come here and just immediately want, I'm going to dress like you, I'm going to talk like you, I'm going to, buy the same stuff you do, that kind of thing.
Right.
They think you're supposed to do that, supposed to want to do that.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I've been noticing that with a lot of like the Asian American identity here, that it's like, obviously being like Asian and Hispanic is such a niche that it's hard, it's hard for me to find, come into central Illinois and find my band of like also Chinese Latinos.
Sure, there's tons of them.
They're right. We have our own club.
Yeah.
But no, I think a lot of like Asian American students, like I feel like people that are my age, they also like straddle this. It's because Asian Americans are like the model minority per se, as what they've been called, and like, and so there's not a denial of that they're children of Asian immigrants, but there's also I don't know, this distance from all other minorities, and a distance from the fact that their culture is different than American culture, and like and honestly it's just such a fascinating point of contention that it's just like I think that I came to realize this because when I say Chinese Peruvian, there's so much in there. Like that's an umbrella term for just a ton of different places. My grandfather is he is part he's Loo-Kung, but his mother was German, a German immigrant in Peru somewhere down the line. My dad's mother is like her family is from her family identifies as being indigenously Andean. On my mom's side, even the Peruvian people are, who knows, like they have Spanish last names, and who knows where that came from. So I think having that mix and having to constantly justify myself has really made me realize that it's all BS. It's all a social construct that like I don't have to put myself in a box, and there's no box for me to go in. And I think that that's what made me realize that so early on in my life, because I know that people that identify with only being of one culture, or being of their parents are of one culture, they're American, they have to, I feel like that's sometimes even more difficult to process, because I already knew from the get-go that like I don't fit anywhere, that I am, and that made me embrace being my own person and being like not fitting into any box. But I know I've been working a lot with Latino student organizations and stuff like that, because I think that that's something that I've maybe distanced myself, being from DC, and it's just such an interesting identity that Mexican American culture specifically is such a prominent culture. And then some people, when they get to college, you're living alone. It's like you either wholeheartedly accept, or you're kind of ashamed of. It's such an interesting thing to look at how everyone processes this fact that that they are a mixture of many different cultures, and they're cultivating their own. I feel like it's not just the past about where your parents came from and where you are now, but it's like you're cultivating this culture of your own, of like being a mix of these two things, and also breaking boundaries, especially being a minority in higher education. It just made me being in this environment has made me realize how arbitrary all these things that we're talking about are, that immigration is such a to an extent it's a spatial thing, because like Chinese culture in South America, that is like there's such a physical distance, but it's all about what we make it, the fact that my family has decided to continue with those traditions and all that stuff. So I think I don't know, I think that definitely being a part of such a diverse family has allowed me to realize that. But I know that especially in times like this, when it was like when the word immigration is such a buzzword of different controversy, that a lot of young individuals even in college are like struggling to accept their identity, or I don't know.
Well, this is the period of your life when you're becoming who you are. I mean, to a certain extent, throughout your life, till the day you die, you're still becoming you. It's still a process, but it's most energetic and actually intentional when you're young. You remember being a little kid and like, well, I'm just weird, and everybody else knows what they're doing, and I don't, and so I have to look at them and figure out what they're doing and how they're doing it, and that's how you learn stuff, is by watching people and picking things up. And so this is the time, when you have to kind of arrive at that, and you're lucky in a way that you had a complicated history, because you kind of got to some of those things earlier than probably a lot of your peers will, because they didn't have to think about it. So that was not in their consciousness until maybe recently, or they get to school and then suddenly everybody's like, I'm Latino, I'm Asian, I'm whatever, and they're like going, oh, I never thought about it before. I guess
Yeah.
well, I'll have to figure out who I am and discover my roots and all that. You've
Yeah.
had to do that at an early age for whatever reason, and so that's good. You got that out of the way, and you can worry about other stuff.
Yeah.
That's great.
But also, I think, I mean, this being the time and like, being young and, college, all that stuff,
Yeah.
finding your identity. But I also dislike the climate in general and, the state of the country. It's become sensationalized, and it's like, it's not your typical finding out who you are. It's like you're identifying when you identify with all these like greater cultures. It's like you're attaching yourself to all these like sensationalist things in the media, and people,
Yeah.
attach so many different sentiments to your identity, which is your own.
Right. Yeah, and it is such a unique thing, as you were saying. Like, you are this mix of things that's pretty unique. I'm sure if you have siblings, they would also be that same thing. But you might have some friends and neighbors who have similar backgrounds, but you're, if not one of a kind in the whole entire universe. But certainly now that you've stepped out of where you're from and you're here,
Yeah.
you're pretty unique, I would think, and you're probably not going to run into anybody else that you can go, oh, you too? Oh my gosh, we're exactly
Yeah.
the same. It's ow, it's going to be. I'm just a mess. I'm sorry. For the listener, I've got a cold and I'm just falling apart here. So this may be my last show. I'm probably going to
Oh
die
no.
here tonight, but I'm sticking it out. I'm doing my best, and then die with my boots on, right?
Right. The show comes first.
Right. Have to do the show. So if I cough or sniff or something, you'll know why. No, I was just going to say, what was I going to say? Oh, the fact that you're here now gives you an interesting perspective on which form of colonialism left a bigger mess behind it when it went away, like the
Right.
Spanish colonialism in South America or English colonialism in North America. I mean, both of them left just a horrible mess. And in the case of English colonialism, it's not over with. I mean, the Europeans are still in the process of colonizing the United States anyway, even if it's no longer being directed from overseas. It's still, the descendants of those people are still in the process of trying to
Yeah.
colonize, as you can see if you study any kind of indigenous issues up here. But Spain left a long time ago in South America. They kind of just said, okay, we got all your silver, and
Yeah.
we're done.
Well, yeah, like I said, I'm studying urban planning, so a lot of the, if you look internationally, a lot of the cities are so marked by like colonialism
Yeah.
that, you could argue that it's, still not over because of the spatial organization of like, how the people in power wanted it to look like.
Right.
You can go to Peru and a lot of other countries in South America, and the Spanish would purposely build cathedrals on top of whatever temple was there.
Mhm.
And still in a lot of other countries too, like India, they created New Delhi, for the white settlers, and Old Delhi for the people that already inhabited it. And even though in other countries maybe the white influence has left, these spatial like differences and this spatial removal of people in power is still very much in place. That in a lot of these cities,